So one of these days we're going to go through a video shoot day without me messing something up. I guess I'm not as good at multitasking as I thought. Today the mess up was actually my personal most common mistake. For whatever reason, when it comes to sandwich bread, I like to forget putting in the sourdough starter. So this is the third time now that I've done this. But you guys are lucky because I get to demonstrate something for you that will really help if you're still at a level of hand mixing. So we've talked about how if you're making less than 40 loaves a day, it probably doesn't make sense for you to invest in a mixer yet. So one of the ways that you can handle developing gluten is to mix everything but the starter. So let's pretend this is more of a base sourdough dough, flour, water, salt, and starter. So I can do something called a premix and just mix the flour, water, and salt together. I'll treat it exactly like an autolyse. So I'll bring the ingredients together in a bin and I will hand mix them just to the point of incorporation. They can be shaggy, there doesn't have to be any particular development. I will then let that mix sit for a couple hours and then move it into a refrigerated space overnight. So it can go now for 8-10 hours so long as you refrigerate it. And this is basically a slower version of the autolyse. So the salt makes that process go slower, and by the next morning you can come in and include your starter. The nice thing about how that works out time-wise is you have to feed your sourdough starter and get it up to maturity. That's an 8-hour cycle. So you can prepare your sourdough starter and you can do your premix, let both of those go for the 8 hours. Then when you bring them together, you've already got nice strong dough and your sourdough starter is mature. So what I'm gonna do now is demonstrate how to add sourdough starter to a premix. Granted, this mix has butter and other inclusions, and I've actually never done that before, so I'm entering into sort of an unknown territory, but I'm pretty confident in what's gonna happen here. So I'm gonna do exactly what I did whenever I use any other inclusions like fruits and nuts or green olives. You can learn more about this process in more detail by picking up the ebook Open Crumb Mastery by Trevor Wilson, who I have quoted before, but this is where this process comes from. I didn't make this up. And he describes the dimpling of the sourdough starter in as very satisfying, watching these two things become one. And so I'll show you how this goes. So I have a liquid starter. I've talked about how the starter is more goop than anything else. So it's gonna take a moment to work its way in. You're gonna get your hands messy during this. There's just no avoiding that. And at first it seems like not a whole lot's happening, but you're slowly working your way into the dough. You wanna try to get into just a mindset of being okay with the fact that you're gonna be here for a few minutes. This is not really a game for the impatient, because I'm not even really seeing a whole lot of feedback. I can feel that the sourdough starter is slowly working its way in, but this particular dough is gonna be harder to do than others. So our sourdough formula, we are in the 20% range, baker's percentage of starter. Anytime we do an enriched sourdough, like the sandwich loaf, our sourdough starter percentage climbs to a higher percentage. And obviously, the higher the amount of starter that you're trying to incorporate, the harder that it's going to be to incorporate it. But you can see that over time, I'm no longer seeing that pool that you can see next door in the bin, and rather I'm seeing kind of a mixture of these two bins as they come together. Just like in the inclusion loaves, like the fruit and nut and the green olive loaves that we've done, you don't want to shortchange this dimpling process because we're going to go through folds now. So this dough really has not had a chance to do any fermentation. The gluten has come together because of the time, but there hasn't been a levain in it. And so we're sort of, it's almost like we just finished the mix right now. I would say that that's probably very accurate to say this is the end of the mixing phase. So we've gotten to this level, and now I can move to folding. And again, I'm going to use the folding technique where I'm folding up and then towards me, because the next step again is to create a little bit of a sandwich with the sourdough starter in the middle between the two dough layers. So I've got layer one. Now that dough starter dough became dough starter dough, dough starter dough. So now I have 2 layers of starter spread throughout. Now I'm going to take that and multiply by 2 again. So now I have 4 layers of starter spread throughout this massive dough. And so we're going to fold this dough 2 more times. Each time we're going to get at least 3 folds. And so each time I'm going to go from 1 to 2 to 4, where I'm at now. And then I'm going to go 8, 16, 32 by the end of fold number 2. And by the end of fold number 3, I'm going to be 64, 128, 256 layers. And so at that point, the starter is very evenly spread throughout, and we're going to get nice and even fermentation. So in this case, this was just a mistake. I didn't add the starter into the dough. And I think a lot of you that don't know that this is something you can do might panic in that moment, or might be really upset with yourselves that you forgot something so basic. But this is one of those times where, because I knew about premixing and I knew about the technique about premixing and how to do it, which I would paint all the way back down to the days that we were hand mixing dough. If we never hand mixed dough, this is not a skill set that I would have. And so if I had forgotten my sourdough starter in a mix, I'm not sure that I would have been so confident as to incorporate it later on. But because I know what I know that I've actually made thousands of loaves of bread doing this type of process before. And so as a result, even though I have a few extra ingredients in here, I can infer that I'm going to get a very nice result. I don't expect that these sandwich loaves are going to be any different than our spec sandwich loaf is. It's not a mistake that I have to prepare my clientele for. I don't have to cancel any orders. I don't have to do anything. I just have to take the time to get back on course. Normally we divide and scale sandwich loaves before the sourdough, and today we're just going to divide and scale after we do all the sourdough. It will work out just fine. By the end of it, we won't have even lost any time. So I'm dimpling the second bin. I'm getting to the point that the sourdough starter itself is no longer as prominently visible on top. It's starting to work its way in the dough. What's nice is that my liquid starter is further hydrated than the base dough itself. So where Trevor talks about this being very satisfying, it is in the sense that the dough is getting easier to work with over time because it's softening as more water percentage enters the dough. So now we're going to go through the folding and start layering this starter. You can see all the layers now of dough starter, and over time, because what is a sourdough starter if not just flour and water and microbes? So that flour and water is going to combine perfectly with the rest of the dough given time. You don't want to mechanically force it together, because the more you force it inward, the more you're going to tear at the developing dough that you're working on. So again, this is a moment in time where taking more time will be beneficial. Time is your friend here, as opposed to mechanical action. And I could have I guess, thrown this all in a mixer and done it that way. But for me, and I'm pretty sure I've actually done this on video before, because I'm pretty sure the second time that I ever forgot an ingredient on this mix, oh, maybe that was English muffins. I've forgotten on a YouTube video an ingredient before, and then I just threw everything back in the mixer. I'm pretty sure that was English muffin dough though. And that one I treat, in both cases, I would probably do the same here alternatively, but if this was a local sourdough artisan loaf, absolutely fold in the sourdough by hand. And the reason being is it's just gentler than the mix will be. For sandwich loaves or English muffins, I'm not looking for an open crumb structure, and so the strength of my dough at the end matters a little less than it does in the artisan loaves. It's not to say it doesn't matter, because it does, but it's just a little less critical. So, and that's why I had thrown it in the mixer. So you guys have seen me miss one ingredient before, and it was not all the butter. I didn't incorporate all the butter I needed to. And so I just took all that dough and put it back in the mixer and kept mixing. But butter was one of the reasons why, because it was butter was why I did that. Butter is something that I find to be like an added layer on top of the dough, as opposed to something that's mixed all the way in. And so it doesn't seem to matter to me in that situation whether you do it over again. With starter, you have to be a little careful, because the sourdough starter itself is also forming a gluten network, and it's combining perfectly with your base ingredients. So you have more of a chance of negatively impacting the dough when incorporating starter, especially since this dough was already going for, it took me a little over an hour to realize that, actually more like 2 hours to realize I'd forgotten starter. We were going on another mix, and I was wondering why I had so much starter left. So these guys have now gotten one fold. You can see that they're kind of a shaggy mess. So we're gonna come back to these a little later, and I'm hoping to show you a little bit later how these smooth out with each subsequent fold. So we're gonna fold these again about 30 minutes and one more time in about an hour. And by the time you see that last fold in about an hour, they will likely be dramatically different. So now you know. Now you know what to do. If you forget your sourdough starter, don't panic. Just take a few deep breaths and incorporate it this way. So we're getting close to the end of the day now. We only have a few more things left to do. Amongst them is finishing this originally botched sandwich dough. Place is definitely ready for its end of day cleaning now, but that's okay. We'll power through to the end and then get that done. So we last were here about an hour ago, and there's been one fold that happened in between. When I last left you, I could take this dough, pick it up, and I could show you the layers of dough, starter, dough, starter. Now you can't even see the starter at all. There's no indicator that it was never a part of the dough. And so now this really has become more of just a standard fold. If you remember that by the end of this, the starter will have spread to 256 layers within the dough. So it's pretty much everywhere in the dough now. And so now it's just doing its normal thing. This seems to have been a very successful overall correction. And what I said an hour ago, that I expect spec sandwich loaves out of this, like the ones that are in the background over there, which just recently came out of the oven, that still holds true. I don't think that there's going to be anything about these that's abnormal in the least. So next time you guys forget to add starter to your mixes, know that you can still save your day. This one was the only one that I saw like just a speck of starter still, and this last fold will certainly take care of that. So there we go. I put these back on the shelf.